Hormone release is usually controlled by the blood level of the hormone, negative feedback systems, because of three things. Here's the blood level of the hormone is negative feedback. We understand that. They vary within a little desirable range, right? We know that. We've been talking about that. But they're basically controlled by three mechanisms. Just look at it first before you try to write this down. This is perfectly off of a slide. It happens to be slide 39 if you want to write a little 39 there. And this is 16A is the PowerPoint. There's going to be two 16s, 16A and B. Humoral stimuli. That means, humoral means blood. Are there hormones that regulate blood sugar? Yes. So they're using sugar in the blood as their mechanism, as their determining factor. So that's humoral stimuli. Does the nervous system ever have anything to do with this? Hypothalamus, hypothalamus, hypothalamus. So that would be neural stimulus. And then do some hormones control the release of other hormones? Right? Like ACTH and cortisol, which we'll get to. So hormonal stimuli. So hormones are released or produced due to three things. Blood levels of certain chemicals, the nervous system, or other hormones. Real simple. We don't need to go and give any examples because as we do the hormones, we'll be talking about this stuff. So here's what we're ready to do next. Humoral, which means blood levels, neural, which means nervous system, and hormonal, which means other hormones. We already know the anterior pituitary hormones. How many of y'all can name them looking up at that board now? So when you try to do these, here's what I suggest. I don't care how you do it, but when you do it, if you do the same order every time, it really helps you. If you have a mental hook. So when I try to memorize a list, I try to come up with some order that I would do. Hey, this is how it's done here. That may or may not be the order that I would do. Actually, it's not the order that I would do. But that doesn't matter because it's not about what order I would do. It's whatever order you choose. I always start with growth hormones. And I always end with FSH and LH, right? Because they go together. And then you have in there in the middle somewhere thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, and prolactin. And if you do it in the same order, you pick the order, then you got it made. I'll just tell you, if you're trying to memorize a list of things, I mean, maybe you don't need to do this for this, but I'll just help you out. Yes, ma'am. That's what I'm going to tell them right now. That's exactly where I'm going to go. So we could say something like, great, tasty, and filling lovely popsicles. I mean, that's silly. That's lame, right? But you make up a sentence. It's called a mnemonic. You use the first letter for a word, and you make a funny little sentence. So let's go through our hormones. Anterior pituitary hormones. Hey, they're all protein-based. Well, they're actually all proteins, but they're all non-steroids. We already knew that. They basically work by second messengers. Most of them use cyclic AMP. I'm not going to get particular on that, so that's okay. If I use the word tropic, do you guys remember that from the first week? That means it causes the release of another hormone, or it controls another gland's release, right? So let's just jump right into growth hormone, what it does, how it works, etc. And I'm going to take a little break from writing, and we're just going to cruise through some PowerPoints right now. All right? Sometimes when I hop into the PowerPoint, we can make up a little time and go a little faster. It doesn't mean you shouldn't take any notes, but I'm not going to give you the time like when I was drawing the pictures and taking a lot of time. You're probably writing a lot and stuff. Now you're going to need to find some fancy ways to take fast notes. Here we go. Okay, growth hormone, generically we would say it stimulates what? Growth. But this isn't lab, this is lecture, so we got to dig deep and get in depth. And here's what it is. Growth hormone targets most body cells. It specifically loves bone and muscle and cartilage, though. We can't leave off cartilage, even though they left it off the PowerPoint. So sometimes I like to do this and type stuff in, and then I'll re-upload it for you later. That's just one word. It's not that big a deal, but, you know, over the course of time, we may add a few more. Now, the interesting thing is the effects of growth hormone are not all direct. See, growth hormone causes certain effects, but what it also does is causes tissues to release chemicals that we like to now refer to as somatomedins. Yes, they're insulin-like growth factors, but the name that they are commonly going to and using now are somatomedins. So here's how it works. Growth hormone causes certain tissues to make chemicals called somatomedins. I mean, one of the main places that the somatomedins are produced is by the liver. You know, you probably won't see that on the test, to be honest with you. I just leave it in there because it's in the book. All right. I'll use the term somatomedins if I use anything at all. Excuse me. Okay, one of the big ideas is that cells that are preparing to grow or repair, think of growth hormone as growth and repair, not just growth. If a cell's going to repair some damage, do you think that it might build up stuff on the inside? You think that it might be building any proteins to repair damage? For instance, you go to the gym and you work out. We can link growth hormone to this. You damage your muscle, right? And what does it do? It repairs by building new proteins. Okay? So even though growth hormone is not a steroid, it's crazy because it does cause proteins to be built in the cells. All right? What are proteins built from? Amino acids. So look at the first bullet. Growth hormone causes an increase of uptake of amino acids into cells directly for the purpose of building proteins. Building proteins. It puts amino acids in the cells to build proteins. Other thing that growth hormone does. So think of an athlete that's taken human growth hormone. Are they going to get a big, huge pot belly while they're on growth hormone? No. What's going to happen to their fat stores? They're going to shrink. They're going to be burned up. Because, here's why. Growth hormone causes you to shift. We normally burn carbohydrates, glucose for fuel. That's our first fuel. Growth hormone causes us to save those or spare those. So blood levels of sugar go up as we shift to burning fats instead of carbohydrates. That's what that says. It encourages the use of fat for fuel. That's called the breakdown of fat. It's called lipolysis. And we shift from a carbohydrate metabolism to a lipid metabolism. We burn fat instead of sugar. So your sugar levels do what? This next slide is very similar. It will have the same kind of stuff on it. Look, we mobilize fats. Blood sugar levels are going up. Here's the important thing right here. Look at this. Anytime the body's under a certain type of stress, and really growth is kind of a stress to the body, I want you to understand something. The brain can only use sugar. I think I better write some of this down so you can see it too. The brain uses glucose for fuel. So when we're under a stress like growth or repair, we want to save the glucose, which, what's the other name for glucose? Sugar. We want to save that for what? Save glucose for the brain. How important is your brain? Very. See, your brain can't burn fats for energy. Your brain can't burn amino acids for energy. It can only burn sugar for energy. That's the cool thing about the brain. So we get an increase in blood sugar. Bless you. And what are we burning instead of the sugar? We are burning or metabolizing. When we say burning, that's what we mean. We're metabolizing because the byproduct's heat. Fat. That's called lipolysis. Lipolysis. We're causing what to move into cells? Amino acids. Why? To build protein for that repair. To build protein for the repair. Well, that sounds pretty good. You know what happens to growth hormone levels naturally as people age? They decrease. So as people age, typically they lose muscle mass as they age. So some doctors, when people get old enough, sometimes they supplement with a little human growth hormone. In anti-aging medicine, that's what they're doing. And that causes you to shift how your body's metabolism works. All right? You do too much of anything, you get negative effects. So, definitely. Is growth hormone a steroid? No, it's an amino acid-based or a protein-based hormone, right? But can it cause protein synthesis? Yes. When does most growth and repair occur? At night. You know, you hear this, right? Kids, teenagers grow when? At night. Do they get growing pains at night sometimes? In their knees and so forth? Yeah. So most of the repair occurs at night. Here's another really important thing, right in this middle area, right in here. What is that? Glycogen. Chain of sugars from last night. Didn't we mention it last night? Big chain of sugars. What happens when you break glycogen down? You get free glucose that can go where? Into the blood. This is one way that growth hormone raises the blood sugar. It causes the liver and your muscles to break down some glycogen. Break down some glycogen. That is called, right here, glycogenolysis. Glycogenolysis. Lysis means what? Breakdown. This is telling you, breakdown of glycogen. I couldn't hear you. No, it breaks big carbohydrates into tiny carbohydrates, but they don't get absorbed into the cells. They stay in the blood so that they can just be used by the brain. Okay? Therefore, one of the ways that growth hormone works is it's a negative feedback hormone based upon blood sugar levels. based upon blood sugar levels. Blood sugar has something to do with growth hormone. Therefore, when your blood sugar gets, because growth hormone causes that to happen, right? So when it gets too high, what would negative feedback say? Shut down the process, shut down growth hormone. Wow. You mean excessive sugar shuts down growth hormone? Did you hear that? Excessive sugar can shut down growth hormone. We have it right here. It's the last bullet in the PowerPoint. Juice. There was a study done in the 70s. They tracked kids until they grew up. And back then, people didn't drink as much liquid. We didn't get as many calories from liquids, but this is what they found. That on average, kids that have 2 cups or more of juice a day, how much is 2 cups? 16 ounces. That's 2 cups in a day. Were on average 2 inches shorter than kids that did not. 2 inches shorter than kids that did not. Juice, sugar, imagine how much worse soda is. It stunts your growth if you have it during your teen years when you do most of your growing. It can do it when you're younger as well. But kids that had it, that's what they showed, 2 inches. That's pretty significant. And they do that, and it was a large study, you know. You don't know what your genetic potential was. So what if every day in high school what you did was walk to 7-Eleven, drink a big gulp, and eat a huge Snicker bar? Then maybe you're not as tall as you could have been. Not necessarily such a big deal. But hey, you never know. Yeah, I know. Hey, does this make sense? Right here? Good. You need to know these as well. Homeostatic imbalances, you can read about them. I'll just go ahead and tell you. Too much growth hormone causes kids to get big and tall, right? It's called gigantism. How tall are people with gigantism? Like 7 feet. Okay, you're 6'5", you're not a giant. All right? You're 7'7", maybe you are. How tall was the tallest man ever? 8'11" 3/4. His name was Robert, by the way. Okay. How tall is 8'11" 3/4? Okay, that right there is 7.5 to the top of my finger. So that's almost 1.5 feet taller than that. It's 1/4 inch shy of 1.5 feet taller than that. That's above the next brick. That's his head. How high was his hand if he stood by a basketball goal? I mean, you know those guys that are 7'7" can just go and dunk it, right? His hand was like close to 12 feet. That's 2 feet above a rim on a professional basketball goal. That's crazy tall. By the way, they have a picture of him with a dwarf. That's pretty cool. Okay, now gigantism only occurs up until your growth plates fused. You learned about growth plates in AMP1. Once they fuse, whatever age you are, you cannot get taller. Some people grow till they're 12 or 14. Anybody in here reach their adult height at 12? 13? 14? 15? 15? 16? Anybody think they're still growing? Guys usually reach their adult height later, right? My best friend graduated from high school. I was like 1.5 inches taller than him. Yeah. Now he's like 2.5 inches taller than me. That boy grew till he was about 23 years old. Just steadily kept growing. Just kept growing. He had a slower metabolism than me, But his growth hormone just kept on kicking in. His growth plates never fused, and he just kept getting taller and taller and taller. Juice doesn't shut your growth plates off. Yeah, my mom made sweet tea when we were kids. I don't drink the stuff anymore, but that's probably what did it. My first cousin's 6'5", by the way. My mom's sister's son. That's the only other boy, so me and my brother. Oh, well, she didn't make sweet tea. They live in California. Of course. Man, and she smoked and didn't breastfeed me. Oh, my goodness. That was the 70s. I'm telling you what she smoked, though. All right. What's dwarfism? That's hyposecretion. And it has to happen in children. If it happens in adults, you're not going to get shorter. You can't undo your growth plates and let your bones shrink. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? That would be. Okay. Acromegaly is when you have excessive growth hormone after the plates have fused. You can no longer get taller, but your bones can get thicker. So they have a similar look. People with acromegaly have a forehead that sticks out. They have a chin that juts way out, big cheekbones, and really thick hands and feet. You know, Andre the Giant? Okay. How about back in the 70s, those James Bond movies, they had this guy named Jaws in them? How many people know who that is? Yeah, all of us oldie loxes. All right, so anyway, there we have it. So, you know, Google acromegaly sometime and you'll see pictures. And you'll go, oh, that's the look, because we've all... Tony Robbins, y'all know who he is? Motivational speaker. He has acromegaly. He's not quite a giant because he's only 6'8", but, you know, he's a pretty big dude. Thyroid stimulating hormone is next. What gland are we doing right now? Oh, very nice. Anterior pituitary. So where's thyroid stimulating hormone produced? Anterior pituitary. And what controls its release? A releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Great. And where does thyroid stimulating hormone travel? Through the blood, goes everywhere, targets cells that have receptors on the surface or inside. Well, let's not sweat that, but probably on the surface because it's what kind of hormone? Non-steroid hormone. You guys are getting it good. So here's the deal. Thyroid stimulating hormone targets the thyroid and stimulates it and causes it to release the thyroid hormones that we learned about last night, T3 and T4. It stimulates the direct release of the thyroid hormones. So here's how it works right here. Hypothalamus, the releasing hormone. Anterior pituitary produces thyroid stimulating hormone, causes the thyroid to produce the thyroid hormones, and they go do their deal out in the body. Do you remember what the thyroid hormones cause? Increase of metabolic rate, increase in metabolism. Good. That's really a very easy hormone. I mean, if we have to have an easy hormone, it's like prolactin and thyroid stimulating hormone. Those are pretty easy. The name says it all. The name says it all. ACTH. The second bullet is its main effect. ACTH causes the adrenal cortex to release cortisol, which you've now heard of 3 times. 4 times maybe even. What kind of hormone is cortisol since it comes from the adrenal cortex? Steroid. It's a steroid hormone. It comes from the middle region, I'll just remind you, middle region of the adrenal cortex, which is called the zona fasciculata. Great. Zona fasciculata. So this is how things work. Here, let's see if there's not. I thought I might have a similar chain reaction there, but we don't. So what causes the release of ACTH? A releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, which controls the anterior pituitary and causes the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, which travels where? Through the blood, goes everywhere. Targets cells that have receptors, which are primarily located in the adrenal cortex, and the main thing it causes is the release of what hormone? Cortisol, which, by the way, this is the major stress hormone. Cortisol is, so that makes ACTH a major stress hormone. When you're under stress, you're dumping ACTH, and that's causing cortisol to go out in the body. Yeah, we don't need to get that specific on it. Cool, we got the gonadotropins next. I would typically like to do prolactin first, so I will. Why not? There it is. Because it's so easy. Raise your hand if there's prolactin in your body right now. Okay, all of us have prolactin. We probably don't have very high levels of prolactin, right, guys? All right, nope. We're not looking for that. Okay. Main job of prolactin. By the way, prolactin doesn't just do this. It does other things as well. This is just all we usually talk about in A&P. All right? It's the hormone of milk production, which targets what glands? Mammary glands. But does it just go straight from the brain to the breast? No, it doesn't. It goes everywhere. Boy, we're getting used to that, aren't we? Okay. And we know what elevated prolactin in males causes? Right? How would we draw that right here? Let's not draw that. Okay. So what does that mean? What's that mean? Female. What's that mean? Male. Why is that male and that's female? You know what that stands for? No, I'm being serious. That's Mars. That's a shield and a sword. And that's Venus. That's a mirror, so she could look at herself. And those became the symbols for women and men. And this is the symbol for elevated prolactin in men. Yes, I recorded it. Okay. There you go. I bet you remember it, though. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. The two gonadotropins are follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. FSH and LH. I love your little handout for this. Very, very good. If you learn the handout, you're going to own what I might ask you on the test. Both of them target the same things. They target the gonads. That's why they're called gonadotropins. Right? They cause the gonads to release hormones. But they also do other things. Okay? You may remember last night we looked at an ovary. An ovary had something called a follicle, didn't it? We had primordial and primaries, and there's others. And what's inside the follicle? An oocyte, which we commonly refer to as an egg. So, follicle-stimulating hormone causes the follicle to grow and egg production. Ovum, if you will, production. Production of the oocyte is due to FSH, maturation production. Therefore, it does the same thing in men. But we don't produce eggs. What do we produce? sperm. So FSH is the one that causes us to build our little reproductive cells, our little sex cells, the egg and the sperm. And how do you get there first? You go, within the follicle grows the egg. Egg production. Also then in men it would do sperm production, which is a similar process. Okay? Luteinizing hormone. The main thing that we like to focus on, and I'll do this in the reproductive chapter, I'll remind you of this, LH in women spikes when you ovulate. It causes ovulation. I mean, it spikes big time. You know what? I don't know what an ovulation kit tests for exactly, to be honest with you. I don't know. But I know a woman can tell when she's ovulating by a few things, and we'll talk about that later on. One is the day you ovulate, you get a little fever. Temperature goes up by an average of 1 degree every time you ovulate. So if you chart your temperature every day, like 2 times a day, check it in the morning and the afternoon, and you faithfully check it for months and months and months and months and months, you'll start to see a pattern. And you'll start to notice on the day you ovulate, your temperature's up. And then it goes back down. And then it's up and it goes back down. And also, some women get a pain on one side of the body when they ovulate. When do you ovulate? 14 days after your period starts. If you're average, you know. Nobody's exactly average. But some people are, believe it or not. Okay? Some women, I've known girls that are like, I have this, you know, and they've had it for years and they never knew what it was because it's not associated with their period. Their period they think of when they're bleeding, and then after that they don't think about what's going on. But usually about a week to 10 days after your period stops is when you ovulate. And if you get a pain then, that's because the ovary is inflamed when it ejects the oocyte out. That's what ovulation is, and it can hurt, actually. And you can get a little fever from that inflammatory process. All right. Next, what's left after ovulation occurs is this structure called a corpus luteum. You don't need to write that yet, but that's the name here, luteinizing hormone. And that makes progesterone in females. And this hormone influences certain cells of the male to make testosterone. Do you guys happen to remember the name of the cells from last night that make testosterone? Interstitial, very good, the interstitial cells. So that is FSH and LH. We will do them again later on. We will even show their levels, how they rise and fall through a female's monthly cycle when we get to the end of the semester. Wow, that finishes up our first PowerPoint. So you can see it's crazy. Just the background material and the hypothalamus/pituitary is about half of the material for this chapter. All right? So now what we're going to move into is the thyroid gland. We've talked about the thyroid, so I bet if I show you this picture, especially this right here, it's going to jog your memory. Where's your thyroid? It's down low. Okay? It's below. If you're a guy, it's below your Adam's apple. Maybe it tails up on the sides up high, but it's a little lower by that little crease down here. Okay? That's where your thyroid is, right there. It's got a little connector across the middle called the isthmus. You can see it spelled right up there, ISTHMUS. And it's kind of shaped like a butterfly. Main function of the thyroid to regulate what? Yeah, your metabolic rate. Cool. What are the names of the 2 thyroid hormones? Thyroxine and triiodothyronine. Wow. Thyroxine is called T4 because it has 4 iodine molecules. Triiodothyronine is called T3 because it has 3. By the way, thyroxine has another name. Anybody know what its other name is? See this right here? T4 is called tetraiodothyronine. That's its other name because it has 4 iodines. They chose to start calling it thyroxine, which is easier. But actually, if you're memorizing this, it's pretty easy to just memorize tetra with that one. But like I said, nobody uses that hardly anymore, so not as relevant. Major metabolic hormone. Increases metabolic rate and heats you up, warms you up. When you have an increase in metabolism, your body temperature goes up. This can play a major role in lots of stuff. Thyroid helps to maintain normal blood pressure. That's cool. I think we like that, blood pressure. Notice that's normal blood pressure. It helps regulate normal blood pressure, maintain normal pressure. Tissue growth. Would you imagine that metabolism has something to do with growth and repair? Might that work with another hormone? Growth hormone. See, in children, in kids, growth hormone and thyroid hormone go hand in hand for their growth and their development. Can you be a dwarf if you have low growth hormone? Yeah, if that happened when you're a kid. But guess what? If you have very low thyroid hormone, that also produces a type of dwarfism. Here's the difference. If the thyroid hormone's low, it's not just the body that doesn't develop, the brain doesn't develop properly either, so they have decreased mental faculties as well, if it's from thyroid hormone. Most people that are short, little people, do not have that, okay? They have normal intelligence just like anybody else. They can be highly intelligent. It doesn't matter. How many people have ever been to a Little People of America convention? LPA. Really? When I was in chiropractic college, there was a guy that lived here in town who happened to be a dwarf, and he moved to Dallas, and he was friends with my brother and his best friend. And he got to Dallas, he didn't know anybody, so they gave him my phone number and gave me his phone number and said, hey, call him, you know. So I did, and he's like, wow, you actually called. Nobody, you know, does that. So we became friends, and we started hanging out. And then I got into chiropractic college, and he happened to have a roommate that was also a dwarf. And so we all started hanging out, went to the Improv a couple of times, saw him get really hammered, had to carry them both out, but anyway. So then I got invited to this convention in San Antonio. They have, every year, they have a Little People of America convention in some big city, and they like take over one hotel. It's crazy. Yes, sir?
I'm just wondering, what causes the primordial dwarfism?
I don't know. I don't know enough about all the various dwarfisms.
That's even smaller.
Yeah, I don't know what causes that one specifically. There's one kind of dwarfism that's called a cartilage hair dwarf, and the reason that I know about that is because his friend had that type of dwarfism, and it causes them to be highly flexible. They can take their hand and pull it all the way back. Okay? Well, the cartilage, they have excessive cartilage, and it's extremely flexible, and the ends of their fingers are still really wide and flayed. Okay? And it's very common, that type of dwarfism is common in the Amish and people from Pennsylvania, because there's high Amish populations up there. So this was really cool. As an intern in the chiropractic clinic when I was in school, I gave Danny, my one friend, I let my best friend treat him, and then I treated Danny's roommate. We could fit his whole body on one piece of x-ray film, a full x-ray of this person on one piece of x-ray film. It was pretty cool. I became the favorite intern of all the radiologists because they wanted to read those x-rays all the time. So it was pretty fun. No, nobody's 17 inches tall. It's a big x-ray film. Yeah. What, it's by 36, right? 18 by 36 or 17 by 36, something like that. Yeah. No, not a little one. Not like, just a full, what we would call a full spine, typically. By the way, y'all know who my patient was. You know who Mini-Me is? That was Danny's roommate. Vern Schroyer was Danny's roommate. So he was my patient when I was a chiropractic intern. And I won't tell you anything more about him. Okay. Here's how, in your book, and I didn't bring my book, here's what I want y'all to do. Turn the page in your book. There's a table, 16.2. It's on 612 in the book that I'm looking at. And the publishers didn't happen to send this as a figure, so I don't have it up there and I haven't reproduced it or anything. This table is the best way to learn what the thyroid does. And the way that you do it is this. You look at the effects if there's hypersecretion and the effects if there's hyposecretion. And you look at the various systems. That's the way that this goes. So what I like to do, you know, we do the opposite thing. What I like to say is learn the hypersecretion. What does hyper mean? It means too much. It means excessive. See, if you have excessive thyroid hormone, what would happen to your metabolic rate? It would go up. So what would happen to your body temperature? It would go up. And what would happen to your diameter? You would shrink. You would get smaller. You would be thin, right? You would typically have a weight loss. Do you see where it talks about that stuff right at the top? And if you're losing weight and your body's got this great metabolism, are you probably going to want to eat? Might you get hungry? Yeah, so that's common. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to look at that. Look at the next one. Weight loss. We see that. Okay? And enhanced breakdown. Man, if your metabolism's way up, you're just going to burn everything. So that's easy. You don't even have to try to go, oh, what was that you burned? You burn everything. All three major nutrient groups. Below that, might you have difficulty focusing and sleeping if your metabolism is just kicking in? That causes you to have excessive energy. So you're too awake, you're too alert. Maybe you're irritable. And then we go down from that. By the way, they call this Graves' disease. Do you see that word right before Graves' disease? Exophthalmos. Anybody know what that is? People that have thyroid disease, hyperthyroidism, their eyes push forward in the socket. There's an accumulation of fat that builds up in the eye socket, and you can see it on people, and you'll start to notice this. If you look at somebody and you can see the white of their eye all the way around, it's because their eyeball has been pushed forward in the socket. Most people, if you look at their eye, you don't see the white all the way around. You see it in the center and maybe on the side, and sometimes on the top or the bottom, but you almost never see it all the way around. Just pay attention to people, and you'll notice, you'll look around and you'll see some people that you can see the whites of their eyes all the way around. That's a good sign that they might have a thyroid problem. There's other things that can do it, but that's one of the main things that causes that. It's in the book. It's on the previous page. But that's a horrible picture. Not just because it looks gross, because they had her divert her eyes so you can't see what it really looks like. They should have had her looking straight at the camera so you could see what it really looked like. So Google exophthalmos and click on images and see what it shows you. All right. Anyway, cardiovascular. Which one do I want to give you? Heart. That's what I want to give you. Heart palpitations. That makes sense. High blood pressure makes sense. If you got more metabolic rate, your blood pressure goes up. What are palpitations? So when your heart beats irregular, it could speed up, beat fast. Okay? Yeah, since you're eating up your muscles are atrophying. They get weak. That makes sense. The kid part, we're not going to worry about the kids and the bones. But then we'll get to the GI tract. If it's overactive, what do you call that? Yeah, you call it diarrhea, right? If your digestive tract is overactive, that means it pushes its contents through too fast. And when stuff pushes through too fast, it's too watery. Because when it sits in there, the colon pulls water out. So what if you're hypothyroid? What would that do to the digestive tract? It would sit there and pull more water out, and you would be constipated. Okay? Would somebody with hypothyroidism have a lot of energy? No, they would be sluggish. They would be lethargic, right? They might even have memory problems because they wouldn't have enough energy. Would they be teeny tiny usually? No, they would be bigger because their metabolic rate is slow, causes them to gain weight. Everything over there basically is the opposite. I don't like the fact that on here, on one place, they put, anyway, we're not going to worry about that. Look under GI, they say loss of appetite for hyperthyroidism. Don't worry about that one. I don't want to confuse you. Usually they're going to be hungry. But because of what's going on with the digestive tract, it could potentially mess with their appetite. But because of the metabolic rate, they're usually going to be hungry. Okay? That's the big deal. Those are the ones that I wanted you to hit upon. So that helps you to understand the thyroid and all the things that metabolism has to do with in the body. It doesn't just affect generically your metabolism. It has specific effects. Man, I don't think, well, it would be possible, but you'd have too many side effects, possible cardiovascular disorders and stuff like that. It wouldn't be a good way to do it, and I can't imagine a doctor doing that. But somebody that's hypothyroid and supplements with that, then they could lose weight from it, but that's different. So, you know, in that sense, they're not using it as that, but it could have that effect. This right here is what I was talking about earlier. A dwarfism because of low thyroid. It's called cretinism. And notice it's not just short stature, but what goes along with that? Decreased mental function. And there was a picture in the last book that we had of somebody with that syndrome. They have a certain appearance because sometimes hormones cause the body to grow in a certain way as well, so decrease of hormones would also. This, you know what that is? It's called a goiter. Do you know what causes a goiter? It has something to do with the thyroid, right? Yeah, but do you know why? What's going on here? Here's one of the common things with goiter. What's in the thyroid gland? Colloid, right? That stuff called, and I'll go ahead and give it to you for reals this time, thyroglobulin is in there. Now, as that's released from a follicle, you would get your T3 and your T4, triiodothyronine and your thyroxine. And T3 is the active form. It's like 10 times more active than T4. Well, what's the reason we call them T3 and T4? Because they have an iodine. So here's the deal. Sometimes we used to, and they still may do a little bit of this, when you raise crops, you may not let the soil rest in between long enough, and you may deplete the soil. And that depletes it of iodine. And when you eat foods that don't have iodine in them, then you don't have iodine to make T3 and T4. So what happens? You're low in your thyroid hormone. So what would the thyroid gland want to do if you were low on thyroid hormone? It would want to increase production. So it does make more of this. But when we don't have enough iodine there, these come out wrong and they don't work. So it's essentially still low on T3 and T4. So what does that cause? More production. And the gland gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So, to a point, and it depends, but they've found that when they started putting iodine in what? Salt. And that's why they iodize salt, is this right here. Because in the Midwest, goiters used to be very common. So they started to iodize the salt, have people use salt on their food, they get enough iodine, they make proper T3 and T4, they don't get a goiter. Kind of neat. What would be the signal mechanism for increasing the production of this? I don't know if that question made sense. What tells the thyroid to increase its production? Thyroid stimulating hormone. And what tells thyroid stimulating hormone to go out there? The hypothalamus. So see, the hypothalamus is detecting this and increasing that. Thyroid stimulating hormone. That's what it's doing. So a goiter is because of too much what? Okay, yeah. There's elevated TSH, there's elevated thyroglobulin, good. But what's decreased? The actual thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. So if you look at salt, next time you're at the store, look at the big things of salt, and you'll notice, you know, the little girl with the umbrella, Morton Salt. So it will say, this supplies iodine, or this does not. They actually sell salt that is not iodized as well. And that's goiter. It gets its own slide. Calcitonin, we did this last night. So I really don't think we need to talk about calcitonin much. I gave you everything I want you to have on calcitonin on the handout. Remember, calcitonin tones down calcium levels in the blood. Causes you to build bone. Which cells does it activate? Osteoblasts. So therefore, the parathyroid gland, the next one on your sheet, is its antagonist. And the parathyroid glands produce a hormone called parathyroid hormone. It doesn't get much easier than that. Parathyroid gland makes parathyroid hormone. Also called parathormone, but our book doesn't call it that. It is the most important hormone for regulating calcium, maintaining calcium homeostasis. You can see the picture here. They're on the back. They're little pea-sized glands on the back side of the thyroid. We did not see the slide of them in class, so you don't need to worry about that right there. Yeah, 4 to 8 tiny glands embedded in the back of the thyroid. All right, what's on your handout is what I like you to know. And I'll go ahead and go through this one with you. The parathyroid gland has 3 main targets: bone, the intestines, and kidneys. If calcitonin tones it down, parathyroid elevates blood calcium. See how I do that every time? If you just refer back to calcitonin tones it down, so parathyroid raises it up, you always know it. It's less memorization and more just kind of knowing that with a little memory trick, which is really cool. Okay, let me have you think for a second. If we're going to raise calcium levels in the blood, where are we going to get that calcium? Well, the first place might be the bone. If we're going to get it from the bone, what do we have to do to the bone? Chew it up a little bit, right? Break it down. Destroy it, in essence. By the way, that's a normal process. Bone is constantly being remodeled. It's constantly being reabsorbed a little and then built back up. Reabsorbed a little and built back up. When parathyroid levels dominate, it causes us to dissolve a little bone and free that calcium and put it into the blood. Okay? If we're trying to raise blood levels of calcium, would it make sense to urinate out your calcium? So that's why you target the kidneys. You tell the kidneys, don't release calcium in the urine. So that's why they're the target. Why is the intestine a target? Hey, Mr. Intestine, we want to raise the blood level of calcium. Make sure that you absorb as much as you can from the food that I'm eating. So the reason it targets the intestine is it tells it to absorb more food. Now that's not the exact mechanism, but that's a good enough way for you to understand it. I think our handout talks about vitamin D. You know? Because, yeah. And that's, the kidneys activate that, but I like to talk about, you're just not going to want to lose it through the kidneys. And vitamin D causes also calcium reabsorption. So there's this like evil little loop between all of those. This is a great time for me to mention this. The word reabsorption, do you know what it means? It always means put something back into the blood. Or if it wasn't there in the first place, just put it in the blood. So really that should be calcium reabsorption, honestly, goes with the kidneys because it's putting it back in the blood instead of the urine. And for the intestines, we would just say absorption of calcium. That's when you absorb it from you break it down and absorb it from the foods that you eat. How many targets? 3. How many letters in the abbreviation of parathyroid? 3. That's your hook. Bone, intestines, kidneys. Don't pee it out. Suck it out of the food that you're eating and steal it from your bones. Why? Why would we do that? Because we're taught that bone calcium is what it's all about. When we see commercials for osteoporosis and all these calcium supplements, that's all they're talking about is the bone, right? Bone is the last in the levels of importance. That's crazy. Nobody would guess that. How many people remember that from AMP1? Let me see your hands. Oh, okay, cool. Couple of people. And I saw one head nodding. Why? Here's why. Blood calcium is important for lots of things, but here's the three main things. Oh, I can't spell. Muscle. Contraction. Do you remember talking about muscle contraction? Calcium binds to troponin. That causes it to shift and moves tropomyosin out of the way, right? You might remember the sarcoplasmic reticulum dumps calcium within the muscle cell. That's part of muscle contraction. No calcium, no contraction. Number 2, nerve conduction. That means nerve impulses. I don't know, when you did muscles, you might have wrote an essay, and it might have started something like this. An impulse travels down a motor neuron. It reaches the synaptic knob, axon terminal, and it opens up, anybody? Calcium channels. Calcium channels, and calcium rushes into the neuron, and that causes the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. If you don't get calcium rushing into the neuron, you don't get a neurotransmitter release. All neurotransmitter release basically is because calcium moves in. Let me ask you a question. Is it more important to have a functioning brain or a tough bone? Brain. What good are bones if your muscles don't contract? Do you see on a sliding scale that nerve conduction and muscle contraction are more important than perfect bones? But, I mean, our body wants all. It wants to have all of it. But when we're looking at it, those are very important. Number 3, calcium is necessary for, it's actually a clotting factor. It's necessary for blood clotting. I don't know about you, but I would prefer not to bleed to death, you know, if I mess up in the kitchen. And, hey, if bone calcium were what it's all about, then calcium wouldn't regulate these things. These are all life or death, right? Your diaphragm and your heart are muscles. I think that's pretty important. Your brain, your thought process, neurotransmitter release, firing of impulses, pretty important. Bone, important, but not so much when you compare it like that. All right? That's why blood levels of calcium are so fascinating. All right. We got these little guys. The adrenal glands. Where are they? On top of old kidney. Well, man, we've already talked about them. I think you know the 3 layers of the cortex. What are they? Zona, GFR, right? Glomerulosa fasciculata reticularis. Be able to spell them by test night, lab test night. All right? Remember, the adrenal cortex makes steroids. So they will be called corticosteroids because they come from the cortex. So when you see corticosteroids, that's what it means. Adrenal cortex hormones that happen to be steroids. The 3 were aldosterone, cortisol, and the androgens. We'll talk about all 3 separately. And we know the medulla, realistically, produces hormones that mimic the effect of the sympathetic nervous system. Why? Because the sympathetic nervous system uses norepinephrine as its major neurotransmitter. I'll give you that in more depth in just a second. I know some of you don't remember that. Right, there they are, right there. Now, notice that this doesn't say aldosterone, cortisol, and the androgens, does it? It just doesn't say that. It says mineralo, gluco, and gonadotropins. When I do each gland, I'll explain why that's what they call the hormones. Okay? So, or when I explain each region. So there's our picture. What do we have outside the capsule? Fat. And what's the capsule made of? Connective tissue. And look, they're clumpy, and then they're long, and then they're, I don't know, wavy. And then we got big, huge cells down here. We could not see these well on our slides, so we just learned these up here. We need this information nonetheless for lecture and lab. All right. Where are we starting? Right here. We're starting with the zona glomerulosa. It produces a group of chemicals called the mineralocorticoids. The main one is aldosterone. That's the main one. Now, we haven't done the function of aldosterone yet. So this is the first time I'm going to do the function. It's on your lab sheet. You may have heard about it on the lab when you listen to the lab on integrity. You may have read it on the lab sheet, but we haven't physically done it together yet. So let's do it. Aldosterone increases the reabsorption of sodium ions. Okay, what's reabsorption mean? Increases sodium ions in the blood. That's what it means. Is sodium a solute? What is a solute? It is a particle that is dissolved in water. Absolutely. Sodium is a major solute. It is a major solute in the body. It's a particle that's dissolved in water. Now, I don't know. I taught some of y'all AMP1, but not all of y'all. There's this very simple concept that solutes do. Anybody know? That's what it does. See, we were saying all this fancy stuff. Well, they do, you know. Solute sucks. That's what it does. Watch this. That's the evil. I would usually draw him fatter, like that, or something. Okay. But anyway, let's pretend that you don't live in Odessa, and you know what that is. I'm going to call this a slug. It's ugly because I was looking up there. I should have drawn it here, but I didn't. What's a slug? It's a snail without a shell. I know, but how many people have seen a slug in Odessa? Raise your hand. Oh, that's more than I thought. 6 whole people out of 33. Okay? It's a snail without a shell. Are they slimy? Are they wet? Are they full of water? Puffy? Ever put one in your mouth? Oh. How many people have eaten escargot? You like it? Yes? With garlic? At the garlic press, maybe? Garlic. Maybe some lemon? I like it too. All right. So, anyway. Should try it sometime, you know? Homeless snails. There you go. That's what they're not carrying their home on their back. Now, I'm guessing that some of you see, I heard Andy, as soon as he said put salt on them, have done that. Hey, what happens to them when you do that, Lindsay? They shrink, they get little, their skin, if you want to call it that, would bubble, fizz and foam. Why? Because salt sucks water right out of whatever you put it on. Okay? That's how it works. So, look, H2O, this juicy little guy, the water goes there. The water goes out. The water goes out. It goes towards the salt. Solute sucks. So as sodium is going into the blood, what follows it? H2O follows sodium. It works that way, guys. Water always follows it because the solute sucks it there. If you have water now moving into the blood, you have just increased the blood volume and then increased the blood pressure. Does that sound familiar? This works hand in hand with ADH, antidiuretic hormone, to keep the blood pressure up. A major regulator of blood pressure. Hormones are major regulators of blood pressure. Remember, it first works by doing this, increasing the reabsorption of sodium. Sodium moves into the blood, water follows, osmosis, water moves, right? Increased blood volume, increased blood pressure. And by the way, if you've never done this because you're not an evil person, you still know about this. When's the last time you went to a movie at a theater? On a date? With someone new when they were still buying you the popcorn. You remember that? When they spent $1,000 on popcorn for you? Okay? Hey, when you eat popcorn at the movie theater, is it salty? Yeah, you know. Do any of y'all ask for extra popcorn salt that you can take with you and put on it? No? Extra butter? Oh, that's just pure oil. Okay, but anyway, extra butter, extra salt. Why not? Live it up, right? You only live once. So, when you're eating a popcorn, what do your lips feel like? Because the salt on your lips sucks the water right out of your lips, and they get chapped. Well, I'll be. Solute sucks. It does. Yeah, but I can't draw a popcorn as cool as I can. No. You're going to remember that. You're going to say, oh yeah, solute sucks. Aldosterone increases blood pressure, pulls water in. Well, it's crazy. So why do they call aldosterone a mineralocorticoid? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because salt is a mineral, right? And hormones from the cortex are corticosteroids. So a hormone from the adrenal cortex that regulates salt could be classified or called a mineralocorticoid because it's regulating minerals. Aldosterone is the primary mineralocorticoid that's released from the zona glomerulosa. It's not the only one, but it's the only one we'll talk about. And, you know, you can go back through this and read all about it. It says basically what we've talked about. The first time through, this mechanism is extremely important, renin-angiotensin mechanism, but we have 3 chances to talk about this in A&P. I choose to give you a break on the chemical names when we're doing this because we have enough already when we're doing hormones. So we will talk about that later on, okay? We won't skip it totally. Well, we will now, but we'll pick it up later. So you'll get it. But I won't ask you anything about that on a test, okay? Right. The next region is called what? Zona fasciculata. It makes a class of hormones called glucocorticoids. Want to take a wild guess what they're regulating? Sugar. And they're called corticoids because they come from the adrenal cortex and their steroids. Perfect. The primary one is cortisol. See how now you can relate this to what you already learned, and you look at the top and it makes sense now. Cortisol is the main one. It's not the only one. They keep blood levels of sugar relatively constant, maintain blood pressure by, yeah. Okay. So what we want to do with this is the main stress hormone in the body. The main stress hormone in the body. What regulates the release of cortisol? Do you remember? Right, and I put it up there for you so you could see it. ACTH does. This is regulated by adrenocorticotropic hormone. Right, the main things that cortisol does. Cortisol causes you to shift from carbohydrate metabolism to burning fats and even proteins for energy. You burn fat and protein for energy instead of sugar. So look, you get an increase in blood sugar because you're not burning it. And it causes you to break down fats and amino acids for energy, so that floods the blood as well. Why? Why are you not using your sugar? Because you're saving it for the brain, right? This is stress. You're saving it for the brain. The body shifts from burning sugar to elevating the sugar. You burn fats and you burn proteins. Now, the bad thing about burning protein is that's muscle tissue. When you're under stress and you're losing weight, that's not good weight loss. That's loss of muscle as well as possibly some fat loss. But the bad thing about cortisol is even if you're losing some fat, it can cause you to store fat where? Right in your belly. Most people know that now. Cortisol causes fat to be stored in the abdomen. The more stress you're under, it puts fat there. That's just the way that it works. We don't exactly know why it does that, but it does. Could we say it's glucose sparing? Yes, yes. And look at this. This is very important. This process, gluconeogenesis, is the form. It means literally the formation of new sugar. Never put that on a test, because that doesn't tell me you understand it. It's when we use fat and protein to build sugar. You're building sugar, glucose, from fatty acids and amino acids. I know that says fats and proteins, but fatty acids are little fats and amino acids are little teeny tiny pieces of protein. Gluconeogenesis. We're creating new sugar molecules out of the fatty acids and the amino acids. Oh, this stuff isn't in the slide. So now I need to talk about the other stuff that's not on the slide that I haven't put there. Here's the other thing about cortisol. Cortisol has another name. You may have heard of it. Cortisone. People get cortisone injections for what? Inflammation. So cortisol is an anti-inflammatory. It's an anti-inflammatory. But I'm going to tell you, inflammation is a process that is mediated by what cells in the body? Do you know? White blood cells, which are part of what system? The immune system. So have you ever heard when you're stressed that you get sick easier? Because cortisol shuts down your immune system. That's what that means. It depresses your immune system. Excuse me. It also, wow, this one's crazy too. When it causes the breakdown of proteins, it can actually cause the breakdown of collagen as well as muscle. What's collagen an important part of? Ligaments, tendons, your skin. So I just use this to point something out. Sometimes people get cortisone injections because they have inflammation in a joint. They have joint pain. They get a cortisone injection. Cortisone can destroy the connective tissues, which gets down inflammation at the moment, but long term it can destroy or weaken the connective tissues. So when you have an athlete that's getting repeated injections of cortisone to be able to play, what they're actually doing is sacrificing their future for right now, because it's guaranteed that they're going to weaken those joints, and long term they're going to have problems develop from that. Probably not a good deal for a kid that's still in high school to start getting cortisone injections to be able to play a sport, you know? All right. Okay, I think we got all the big deals on cortisol. And I'm guessing that's a good place to stop since it's time to stop.